Today, I'm going to tell the story of a plot to kidnap Abraham Lincoln in 1876, 11 years after he died. Before we get into the exciting details of the actual plot to kidnap him, there is some background that kind of explains how they got to this point, how these kidnappers were driven to this plot. In 1862, the United States Congress passed the Legal Tender Act, which created the first national paper currency. Up to that point, paper currency was a lot less organized. It was issued by individual banks, and so you might have, a guy from Tennessee coming up to Philadelphia and paying using his cash from this bank in Tennessee. It was all kinds of disorganized chaos. And within this chaos, there was also the added element of counterfeit money. Surprisingly, when Congress passed this act creating a national currency, you would think that that would make things a little more difficult for the counterfeiters because without all this sort of disorganized chaos, there's a little less room for them to slip through the cracks. Well, actually, it had the opposite effect because people had such confidence in this new currency and were very excited about it that they kind of let their guard down. And so, whereas before, the shopkeeper in Philadelphia might have been looking at this Tennessee money and thinking, is this real? Now, now that they have this national currency, people are less aware of that and they let their guard down and they just start assuming that all money is real, valid money. So by 1864, 2 years after Congress passes this act, about 50% of the money in circulation is fake. These counterfeiters are having a heyday. I mean, they're just making tons of money and getting away with all kinds of craziness. And the US government has kind of got some other things on their mind, seeing as they're smack in the middle of a civil war. But nevertheless, by 1864, they recognize that the counterfeiting is getting really out of hand and they need to address it. So they appoint a man named William P. Wood to form sort of a task force to track down these counterfeiters and break up counterfeiting rings. Wood hires a few other men to help him out, and they become sort of this unofficial government agency. And for the next year, they see some success in raiding the headquarters of some of these counterfeiters and making arrests, and they start to finally break up some of these counterfeiting rings which had popped up all over the United States. In 1865, they become an official agency of the US government known as the United States Secret Service. So that's something that not a lot of people realize. We tend to associate the Secret Service with protecting the president, but actually they were created in 1864, as I've said, for the purpose of cracking down on the issue of counterfeiting. In 1865, in April, just a couple months before the Secret Service officially became an agency, Abraham Lincoln became the first president to be assassinated. You'd think that they also might be addressing that. But no, it wasn't until around the 1920s that the Secret Service began to be responsible for protecting the president. In 1875, the Secret Service arrests a man named Benjamin Boyd. Benjamin Boyd is a crucial player in the Midwestern counterfeiting rings. He is an engraver, so his job is to engrave the plates with which the fake money is printed. And he is the best engraver there is. Everybody comes to Benjamin Boyd if they need some real, authentic looking counterfeit money. So when Benjamin Boyd is arrested, the counterfeiters of the Midwest are pretty devastated. I mean, he was their guy. And with him gone, their business becomes a lot more difficult. They have a lot more trouble finding engravers, and those that they can find aren't nearly as good at it as him, so they're not making as much money and they're at higher risk of getting caught. One man named Big Jim Kennelly, he comes up with a plan to get Benjamin Boyd back. So he goes up to 3 buddies of his, Terrence Mullen, Jack Hughes, and Herbert Nelson, who all are involved in some shape or form in the counterfeiting business. And he meets up with them at a bar in Chicago. And in a quiet corner of this bar, he tells them his plan. All right, guys, I've figured out how we're going to get Benjamin Boyd back. Now, hear me out. We kidnap Abraham Lincoln. He does realize that Abraham Lincoln's been dead for like 10 years. That's what makes it perfect. It's easy to kidnap a dead guy. He's not going to put up a fight. We kidnap Lincoln's body, which is like a national treasure, and then we hide it and we refuse to give up the location until they let Boyd out of prison and give us $200,000 in ransom. We split the $200,000, we get Benjamin Boyd back, and it's a great time. You know? This guy might be onto something. I mean, it's brilliant. What could go wrong? Kidnapping Abraham Lincoln's dead body, and clearly the government will give us $200,000 to get it back and let our friend out of prison. I love it. I'm in. So Jim Kennelly's friends think this is a pretty good idea, and they agree to help. So he leaves them to it. He decides that his job in this whole plot is going to be dealing with the negotiations once they have the body kidnapped and hidden, and that these other 3 guys, they're going to do the legwork, the actual kidnapping. Kennelly goes back to his hometown, and he leaves these guys to sort it out, make their plan. Just about as soon as Kennelly is gone, one of them, Nelson, backs out. He doesn't want a part of this. He's the smart one who realizes it's a really bad idea, and he gets out of it. The 2 that are left, Mullen and Hughes, they realize they're going to need a 3rd man. So they approach this man named Louis C. Swaggles. And they scope him out first. They don't just go right up to him and tell him about their crazy plot. They make sure that he's cool. He's not going to rot them out. And then, once they're confident, they make a proposition. So, we're working on this whole plan, if you want in. We're gonna kidnap the body of Abraham Lincoln and hold it for ransom. And make like $200,000 off of this, and let Benjamin Boyd out of prison. It's like foolproof. So, you want in? Louis Swagel plays it cool. He's not, immediately jumping up the opportunity, but he does agree. Yeah, I guess I could help you out. I actually do have some experience grave robbing myself. Not to brag, but I'm pretty good at it. This plan is so poorly thought out. In so many ways, some of which I won't get into till later. But one is where they plan to hide the body, which was on the Indiana shore of Lake Michigan in the dunes. The dunes of Lake Michigan are a 10-day journey away from Springfield, which means they would have to travel 10 days with a coffin in the back of their cart. Meanwhile, people probably would notice before that Abraham Lincoln's tomb has been broken into, and probably make the connection that these 3 sketchy-looking guys traveling across Illinois with a suspicious-looking coffin in the back of their wagon might have something to do with it. They're honestly destined to failure, but they don't even get that far. So the day arrives that they've planned to break into this tomb. They plan to do it on Election Day of 1876. Well, election night. The day before, they go and they scope out the tomb. They find that it's this big, beautiful memorial, and there's actually sort of an indoor memorial hall portion. And then behind that, there's the actual tomb, which can only be accessed through a door, which at night is locked with a padlock. The only thing between Abraham Lincoln's remains and the rest of the world is a padlock, which for these guys is perfect. They come back that night, they jump the fence, and they break the padlock and they get in. And they open up the sarcophagus, and there is the coffin of Abraham Lincoln. But here's something else they hadn't thought about. That coffin is really freaking heavy. Like, okay, well, thinking about it, he has had 11 years to decay, but Abraham Lincoln was a big dude. Tallest president, 6'4", and an accomplished boxer. So, like, he was a big dude, had to weigh a lot. And then on top of that, he's in a lead-lined coffin. So these three guys quickly realize that they cannot lift it on their own. So Mullen and Hughes, who are two of these grave robbers, they send their third man, Louis Swagel, to go see if their getaway driver's there yet and see if he'll come help them lift it. Well, Swagel does indeed leave the tomb, but he doesn't go and get the getaway driver because here is another flaw in their plan. Louis Swagel was a Secret Service informant. So backtracking a little bit, when Louis Swiggles is first approached about participating in this plot, he quickly goes to his connections at the Secret Service and tells them about it. And their initial reaction is shock. I mean, it's crazy that anyone would be planning to do this. And so they start figuring out how they're going to stop them and arrest them before anything can happen. But then they realize that they could probably enact a much stronger penalty on these guys and almost make sort of an example of them if they catch them in the act rather than arresting them for the mere conspiracy. So they decide to let these guys go through with it, but they figure they should get approval from the Lincoln family. So they go to Robert Lincoln, Lincoln's only surviving son. So, not to freak you out, but we have reason to believe that these crazy people are trying to break into your dad's tomb and steal his dead body. But we think we're just gonna let them go ahead and do it. Obviously, we're gonna stop them before they can actually steal, but we're gonna let them break in so that we can like arrest them and charge them with grave robbery rather than conspiracy. No, sure, go ahead. I don't care. You're not. I mean, okay, it's just like you're not more concerned about this. Like this is the tomb of your father and your three brothers. Not to mention, it's kind of like a national treasure because you know your father was Abraham Lincoln. But okay, you're fine with it. Okay. Robert Lincoln is surprisingly not that concerned about this and tells them, sure, go ahead. I don't care if you guys, as long as you guys catch the guys, whatever. Um, which the Secret Service is a little shocked by that. Robert Lincoln was strangely chill with this, and honestly, he was just kind of a strange man. In describing him, Thomas Craughwell, the author of Stealing Lincoln's Body, says, the personality of Abraham Lincoln's sole surviving son has always puzzled historians. So they get Robert Lincoln's permission, and so the plot is allowed to go forward, and that is how our friends Mullen and Hughes manage to get as far as they do. So going back to the night of the robbery. Mullen and Hughes, as I've said, have sent Swagels to go get their getaway driver to help them lift this insanely heavy coffin. Well, Swagels does not go to get the getaway driver. He goes to the Memorial Hall where several Secret Service detectives are waiting to catch the thieves in the act. These detectives begin approaching the tomb silently because they're going to sneak up on them and catch them in the act, catch them by surprise. But these grave robbers are not the only people making mistakes tonight. One of the Secret Service detectives goes ahead and gets his pistol out much earlier than he really needs to, and then it goes off by mistake. Mullen and Hughes in the tomb hear the gun go off and naturally, thinking someone's out there, get the hell out of there. They just drop all their tools, leave everything behind, and run. So the detectives, they go into the tomb and they find it empty. Nothing there but the open sarcophagus and these scattered about tools of these grave robbers. So one of the detectives leading this mission, Patrick Tyrrell, he goes out of the tomb and looks around and he sees someone duck behind a pillar. Well, he raises his gun and he starts shooting at him. And then the man behind the pillar starts shooting back at him and they exchange gunfire for a couple minutes and Tyrrell calls out to the men in the tomb. He's like, "Come on, guys, I've got him. I found him. They're here." And then the man behind the pillar stops shooting and says, "Tyrrell, is that you?" Because it was another detective. And so they've lost more time now and given Mullen and Hughes more time to escape. Mullen and Hughes ultimately do make it to, they make it out and they're not caught that night and they return to Chicago. But they still have no clue that Louis Swagels, their accomplice, was the one who ratted them out. So they make no effort to hide from Swagels, who returns to Chicago himself. When he realizes that that's where they are, Swagels quickly tells the Secret Service, and the Secret Service eventually tracks them down and arrests them. So why have more people not heard about this crazy plot to kidnap Abraham Lincoln's body? Well, part of the reason is that the one thing that these guys did right, they picked the right night. And honestly, mostly by accident or coincidence. They had known that election night would be a good night, but what they didn't know is that the election of 1876 would become a very controversial election. It would be a very close vote, and it would be several months before the results were officially confirmed. So the next morning, all the headlines were talking about this contested election, and articles about this plot to kidnap Lincoln's body, other than in Springfield newspapers and other parts of Illinois, were pushed to the back of the newspapers, and it was weeks before anyone ever really heard about it, and by then it was old news. Thus, the story has been lost to history. One thing that happened after this, and that Thomas Craughwell goes into more detail about in his book, is that the memorial committee that maintained and oversaw Lincoln's tomb became very nervous. In particular, this man named John Todd Stort, who was a friend of Lincoln's. He was also a cousin of Mary Todd, Lincoln's wife. He was very concerned that something like this might happen again, and he was concerned that Lincoln's remains were not safe in their tomb. So, along with the groundskeeper, the janitor who looked after the tomb, a man named John Carroll Power, he comes up with a ingenious plan to protect him. And that plan is to bury Abraham Lincoln, the famous, revered leader of our country, in an unmarked grave in the basement beneath his memorial. Lincoln ended up remaining buried in that shallow grave for many years. He was moved around several other times. Craughwell goes into more detail about it in his book, Stealing Lincoln's Body, which I highly recommend, as well as in the corresponding History Channel documentary. I've included links to both of those in the description. Thanks for watching. I will hopefully in the next week or so be coming out with another video, so make sure to subscribe to hear more crazy random history stories.
Call out the Undertaker. Call out the police. The counterfeit faker is coming after me. Yes, I loved him I loved him ambivalently. There's no way to measure the